bearing and bearing false witness. How lying destroys liberal societies. Lying is one of the most corrosive human activities, standing in the way of individual, societal, and general survival and thriving of humanity. The reason is that when we submit to lies, we do not act according to the truth. What is truth? It is reality through time, what was, is, or is going to be. We might wonder why anybody would snub these parameters and instead operate on the basis of fiction. A reasonable answer would be that what is going to be is often not inevitable and that fiction is necessary to imagine, consider, set, and pursue objectives to shape the future. But whichever objectives one might form, it seems equally reasonable to employ factual information to evaluate, and reach for them. The extrapolation of current and past reality is likely to give us grounded perspectives on the shape, merit, and obtainability of our objectives. Not knowing or disregarding truth imperils meeting reality's challenges and opportunities. In short, we increase our risk of failing. This sounds simple and obvious enough. Because reality and our grasp of it are important, we should insist nobody lie to us, and we should not lie to others so we don't do to them what we don't want to suffer from them. And we definitely should not lie to ourselves. However, many of us do not conduct ourselves accordingly. Why is that? To better focus on the causes, we need to distinguish lying from more innocent forms of misrepresentation. A misrepresentation may arise in its widest possible sense from failure to communicate comprehensively to describe what is true. But communications regularly cannot include the entirety of information relevant to a recipient. They can only convey parts and rely that recipients are informed or can inform themselves of relevant other facts and receive presently imparted information in their context. As long as we are unaware our incomplete communication might contribute to a misunderstanding in a recipient, we seem to be exonerated. Other potentially forgivable forms of misrepresentation stem from relaying persons' inadequacies they cannot control. Also excluded are acting, and humorous statements like satire, sarcasm, banter, or verbal pranks that are made with an expectation they will ultimately not be taken seriously at their literal content level. So what is then a lie? In common understanding, it includes some communicative conduct that places others in a false apprehension of reality. But as we just saw, such conduct is not enough. Lying requires willfulness in its commission and about its reception. A lie certainly includes intentional communicative conduct aimed to have someone rely on it and form a misapprehension from it. But it also is thought to apply where we are uncertain whether a statement we make is true or will be misunderstood, and we still go forward making that statement without qualifying it. If we knew or should have known it is untrue, in itself or because it omits critical portions of context, and thus might cause misapprehension, or we should have investigated this, but did not care, we might be reckless or at least negligent liars. A lie may also include occasions where we do not actively communicate, if we do not try to correct falsehoods to prevent or resolve resulting deceptions we can anticipate. Further criteria for determining or grading lies hinge on whether we owe a general or special duty to uphold and relay truth or prevent harm. As we can see, the classification as a lie is not always sharply delineated. The internal and external context of behavior matters. This enables capable liars to operate in a gray zone that can make it difficult to prove them as liars with regard to any particular piece of conduct. Depending on their skill, their lying may only be conclusively identifiable, when one follows patterns of them causing or sustaining misapprehensions. Such patterns require deeper assessments of their conduct and information, to which we may not have access. Their maneuvering, including lying about themselves, their circumstances, intent, and context of statements, introduces a further level to lying that can make it even harder to identify. And, ironically, an accompanying pretense of heightened responsibility to spread truth may enable lies to be committed, distributed, and accepted with a lower risk of being detected, scrutinized, or disputed. But as much as proficient liars may try to camouflage their lies by further levels of lies, they and their verity are put to the test by this simple question: is what they recount, claim, imply, or induce true? Once a falsehood by commission or omission is identified, one can ask further questions such as why they would advance such a falsehood. The motivations and related strategies for lying constitute a range, and they may differ or be absent if lies are committed less than intentionally or planned. However, in its clearest and most commonly condemned form, perpetrators know the truth and that they are lying. They may lie to create untrue perceptions in others that induce these to engage in a state of mind or conduct desired by the perpetrator. Such intentional deception may employ and mix a variety of techniques. Besides relaying or permitting the relaying of untruths, perpetrators may purposely omit telling the truth. They may leave or support misconceptions in victims working in their favor. They may give victims only part of true, relevant information available and withhold other parts. They may prevent victims from accessing information. Usually, but not necessarily, lies are employed in ways that cause detriment to the deceived person or others. That detriment may be intended, accepted, or disregarded as byproduct of benefiting the perpetrators or others. But there is also a commonly excused form of lie employed for the overall benefit of the deceived person or others, which usually involves a comparative cost-benefit assessment. These core concepts of lying have long been known, and many are so apparent that most of us on the receiving end of lies should be aware and wary of them. And we should be expected to put commensurate effort into our resistance to them. None of us should tolerate being lied to because it curtails our ability to determine our life to the best of our abilities. However, this high value of truth is commonly not borne out in Western, and co-opted cultures. We can only see intermittent insistence that others be truthful to us and serious consequences if they are not. One reason for this may be that we employ lies ourselves. We may not expect truth when we are unwilling to stand by it. We may condone lies by others hoping we will not be held to a prohibitive standard when we lie. This induces a setting where everybody may lie without many scruples and where it is upon victims to detect and counteract or live with such lies. The consequences of this environment are palpable. The number and types of sources we trust and degrees to which we trust diminish. Having to be on guard, question, and defer accepting most information, as well as doubting motivations of its sources, complicates and impoverishes our existence. Troubling as this is, it does not tell the whole story of lying. To truly understand why people lie or fall for lies and how the current permissive environment for lies has been generated, we must take into account other failings. Perpetrators and victims may suffer permanent or temporary mental infirmities that result in low critical or judgment ability. Such an infirmity may derive from problems with rational processing, including lack of perception, intelligence, education, or experience. But participants may also suffer from emotional infirmities that result in skewed processing of information and misguided evaluations regarding the utility of employing or submitting to lies. At their worst, mental infirmities may result in full-blown delusions where perpetrators, victims, or both cannot tell truth from lie, or they reverse or equalize their designations without awareness of doing so. This leaves a substantial majority of conditions in which participants possess at least some rational facilities to discern reality. But emotions can be powerful forces in overpowering such rational facilities. Thus, even short of emotional illness, lies are frequently motivated by specific emotions as activating or facilitating elements on the part of representing or receiving persons. Participating emotions may spring from the entire range of emotions, including confidence, fear, shame, guilt, love, hate, greed, envy, adoration, disrespect, trust, distrust, as well as superiority or inferiority complexes. We can imagine how such emotions could motivate the commission of lies. But emotions can also influence receptiveness. The lie or its circumstances may generate these emotions. Or such emotions may pre-exist in victims and be triggered, shaped, or amplified by a lie. This may take forms where victims might be considered deserving of being deceived as a way of bringing their own turpitude to light and punishment. The pinnacle of such retribution scenarios might be thought when liars fall victim to lies. Still, taking character flaws as reasons for calling into question whether the victim of a lie ought to be protected is rare. Societies generally reject the legitimacy of taking advantage of people's emotional weaknesses. And yet, they hardly ever are prepared to excuse the commission of a lie on the grounds of motivating emotions. So victims of lies seem to have a decisive advantage in having their susceptibility to lies excused. But how should societies handle situations where the victim of a lie knowingly becomes its subject and accomplice? Why ask this question? Because this is a rampant problem considering how many people apparently like being lied to. They like having their views of themselves and the world confirmed rather than questioned. They seek security in lies over potentially or actually disquieting truths and inferences. This is where lying to ourselves comes into play. It is one matter to have others lie to us. With a critical mind, we can assess whether we allow information to enter our trials or convictions. However, these filters and checks cease to exist or lose effectivity when we lie to ourselves. This includes allowing or inviting the lies of others to bypass or pass through our scrutiny facilities and adopting them as ours. The motivations and mechanics of lying to ourselves are very similar to those employed by others lying to us, although the identity of perpetrator and victim complicates their formation and upkeep. We do not want to perceive, acknowledge, or understand certain facts or draw logical conclusions from them. Our desire to avoid considerations of truth or not caring about it makes us lie to ourselves. We do this because reality contradicts what we would like to be factual or disturbs our desired way of life. We try to resolve this discomfort by averting senses and minds from real facts and by imagining and spinning alternate facts. Rather than evaluating conditions, including how we react to them, how we are motivated, and taking some critical distance to ourselves, we give in to our predilections. Lying to ourselves then seems to be childish in two ways. It has an air of covering our senses, expecting what we have detected, or loath to perceive, will go away or never even have been there. And it carries an infantile expectation that conjuring illusions can replace reality we cannot stand. We refuse to concede and work with at least some of reality. There is also an element of hubris at work in our assumption we can change reality by not acknowledging it, and even more so by making up something in our mind to take its place. It is as if we thought we could create or shape reality by insisting on our views. Perception is reality, as the cynical saying goes, that is deemed fact and justification by liars and resigned victims alike. But we may also believe that arranging reality around consistently affirmed lies can will these into a reality where they cease to be lies. One might question how much one can be convinced of one's own lies or at least go along with them. Rational and mental dispositions may play a similar role as in interactive lies. But lying to ourselves exposes us to at least some contemporaneous knowledge of rational and emotional factors on both sides of the lie. And it pitches our skeptical and inquisitive sides against prohibitive aspects. The inherent contradiction of being involved on both ends of a lie pushes for resolution. This may take the form of eventual rejection of a lie. Or it may engender attempts to fix the contradiction by rationalizations how the lie could be true and by emotionalizations that prevent clear perception and thinking. Such justification strategies typically seek support in socialization with others holding out similar lies. This makes people who lie to themselves easy targets for those who wish to use them for their purposes. But self-lies may also gain momentum as a result of socialization. To belong, to be accepted, to obtain support, and to continue despite their lies, individuals may bend their attitudes to reality and comply with views of others whose cooperation they seek. To accommodate all these mental shifts, People lying to themselves characteristically substitute belief for rationality, which may allow them to transcend doubts and shut down illuminating inquiries. Socialization around lies draws substantial momentum from the apparent coincidence of interests among participants. The matching readiness to socialize for mutual reinforcement stems from the difficulty of maintaining lies to oneself and to others over humans' natural skepticism. This is particularly so if that skepticism is fueled by environments confronting participants with truth. Thus, people who try to lie to themselves or to others tend to seek and create settings, including social settings, that normalize those lies. They will seek the company and information flows of similar liars to convince themselves, or in case of interactive lies at least their victims, that they are not lying, but that there is an acceptable basis to their postures. This often results in communication loops where harmonizing lies support and amplify one another toward a closed, coherent view of oneself, other participants, and the outside world. Living in such a surreal social arrangement with choreographed, consistent pretenses of reality might convince inhabitants, even those who previously had doubts or knowingly used lies, that its imaginings are or could become reality. This seemingly based belief in the plausibility and feasibility of the lies underpinning and supporting a social network creates an additional overarching incentive and societal pressure to conform. And building a reality incorporating, implementing, or accommodating these lies may soon concentrate on the so constructed reality as confirmation of underlying lies, making them plausible as truth. The result of such socialized looping of lies is then the creation of self-contained ideological systems. Calling all ideologies schemes of lies may sound overextensive. Arguably, like any statement, a stated system of perception and interpretation can be wrong without the necessary mental elements making it mendacious. This is certainly a possibility where inventors and proponents of an ideology suffer from prohibitive delusions that do not allow them awareness of errors in their claims. But to spread, ideologies must include people beyond such pathological beginnings or contexts. At some point, rather earlier than later, they must employ operatives and have proponents able to approach the ideology with sufficient rational and emotional capacity to consider and judge its relation to reality. By continuing to serve and spread an ideology despite reasonable doubts or loss of conviction in its truthful reflection of reality, such supporters become liars. While it is theoretically possible then, that ideologies could limit themselves to delusionals or only have delusionals join and not lie, any expansive socialization makes this unlikely, and quickly an impossibility. As an ideology grows, it has increasing administrative needs that attract people looking to make a living from it. And it will draw people who try to benefit from its rising property and power. At the latest by such accessions without conviction, ideologies become schemes of lies. So much for the fundamental mendaciousness of ideologies and their organizations. But what about the participation of victims? Ideological systems may originate in the ideas of others, and these others may be delusional, lying to themselves, or pursue ulterior purposes taking advantage of their lies. But they can only succeed if victims suspend their critical mind. And apart from being pathologically delusional, this takes a conscious effort. As long as victims of an ideology possess rational and emotional facilities to consider and judge its truthfulness, and adopt such ideology without engaging, or over the objections of, these facilities, they become blameworthy contributors to the lies of the ideology to which they subscribe. How far that blame carries is another question. Ideologies may make objective distance to their factuality difficult. The world-building inclusiveness of ideologies may be convincing enough to prevent victims from realizing they are victimized, even by themselves. Its disconnectedness is supported by the difficulty of conversing and finding common ground for interaction with those who ground their conduct on facts, and possibly even more so with those subscribing to different sets of lies. This is particularly a problem if groups carry a resulting idea of an ideal organizational scheme. Not all facts marshaled in support of an ideology will be false. So there might be some common ground on which ideologies can coexist with one another or fact-based approaches. However, considering the importance those caught in an ideology accord to it, they may not care much about common ground with others not subscribing to their ideology. Differences in views of facts and conclusions evoke questions they want to avoid. Some ideologies tend to therefore seclude from other views of the truth to preserve their coherence and existence. Others take on and fight other views to secure theirs against being questioned. This may be because they cannot retreat into a discrete culture or subculture. They may also choose confrontation because they claim truth of their assertions of facts and conclusions beyond their followers. Where such assertions conflict with the assertions or lifestyles of others, ideologies may deem compliance by such others an existential challenge. In any event, ideologies may fear that they can only survive against the pressures of other ideologies, truth-based views, or society generally if they are collectively acknowledged and implemented. And, however aggressive ideologies might be for their own reasons, environmental pressure almost as inescapably makes them lash out. Any kind of questioning of their claims, expressly or by the mere existence of a contradictory ideology or a fact-based stance, is likely to be interpreted by them as an attack and answered with emotions and acts of enmity. To stifle doubt and dissent in the face of such contradictions and to push their version of facts and conclusions onto others, ideologies regularly generate institutions and professional operatives charged with defining, packaging, defending, and spreading these claims. They also recruit, and maintain indoctrinated subjects for defending and spreading their message according to their instructions. In promotion of both purposes, organizers often whip up, shape, and reinforce willingness and vigor by their operatives and followers with motivating events. Ideologies might be thought more likely to cooperate with one another the more they coextend in their premises. But even small differences in underlying premises may lead to large divergences in conclusions. And closeness in either may cause particular hostility among ideologies, since they then appear as direct competitors and fertile ground for expansion into similarly disposed subjects. Tribal distinctions and allegiances may dominate the behavior of similar ideologies and render them hostile to one another. Whatever the situation might be, operating under significantly different views of reality does not bode well for humans individually, in a society, or in arrangements among societies. It may prevent constructive dialogue and cooperation, and mere coexistence, depending on the distinctiveness and aggressiveness of ideologies. At best, irreconcilable differences may lead to patterns of dealing with different viewpoints by separation, with contact only at necessary or conducive levels, which, depending on the extremism of an ideology, may shrink to zero. As competition prevents ideologies from implementing their objectives, they may try to reduce or eliminate competing ideologies or objective representations and treatments of the truth. Under conditions where such actions are deemed desirable or necessary, but not currently feasible, ideologies may bide their time choosing coexistence and even cooperation until an opportune moment. They may use this time to maintain or build their strength. But this impermanence causes instability. How would an ideology suppress or eliminate competing ideologies or conduct based on objective truth? At worst by physical restriction or eradication of dissenting organizations and dissenters. Short of such extremes, ideologies might force dissenters to conduct themselves in accordance with the suppressing ideology. Such measures may be supplemented with re-education, and education efforts to instill compliant perceptions and attitudes in objectors and the undecided. Such efforts may be particularly aimed at new generations that have not been exposed or instructed to different viewpoints for major periods in their lives. Still, since ideologies are at their core based on lies and compete with other ideologies at any time, it is unlikely they can convince everybody in their current or desired reach. Realistically, their efforts may thus aim at recruiting enough operatives and believers to silence and compel compliance of bystanders who, although not agreeing with their lies, go along to avoid repercussions. Even if ideologies succeed in ruling a society, Their governance must take the form of an uneasy peace ready for oppression because dissent continues to exist and arise. Successfully managing this instability calls for a subtler strategy that not only suppresses dissent but reduces it by mental conditioning. Educational indoctrination is regularly joined by a lifetime of additional informational and other social engineering into desired directions. When we review such potentials, we cannot help drawing parallels to historical and current events. While some individual and group interaction is characterized by fact-based coordination of individual or group interests, much human interaction seems continually wasted on ideological competition. Many conflicts, societal upheavals and stalemates, and individual quarrels can be traced to differences in perceptions and conclusions drawn from them. Some of this is caused by informational or mental shortfalls apart from lies. But such deficiencies and frailties also form attractive targets for ideologies to insert, propagate, and consolidate themselves. Because ideologies are based on lies, to exist they must forever exert efforts to maintain and impose these lies. Their obligatory single-minded focus on pushing their lies and manifest their reality is unlikely to stop until they fall apart or implode, or until external forces eliminate them. Lying then constitutes a scourge that prevents humans, societies, and humanity from advancing their potentials of maintaining and improving their existence, and it may cause unspeakable harm and pain. These dangers of lying may not have been fully realized in the past because their history had not been written as far and they had materialized on a lesser intensity and scale. However, not too long ago, lying was considered a serious moral if not legal offense that was severely punished. Moral repercussions at times exceeded legal consequences in the severity and duration. Words given were bonds to which their issuers were held. People took personal offense to being lied to, and they shunned perpetrators not only as unreliable sources but as betrayers of a sacred commitment among participants as well as their honor. Liars were not only excluded from communications, but their general standing was reduced or they were banished. The criticality of telling the truth and outlawing of lying was universal. It is still reflected in ubiquitous traditional proverbs and religious codes that lately sound grotesquely out of place. So what happened changed common perception about lying? How has lying become expected conduct with no or very little social stigma attached to it anymore? This devolution seems to coincide with the liberal opening of societies to unprecedented competition of ideologies and freedom to choose among them. Ideologies and lies inherent in them are not a recent phenomenon. Religious and secular ideologies have been at work for thousands of years. But these were overwhelmingly set in restrictive, authoritative environments without general education. And there was not much information about other ideologies and even less choice among them. Compliance was usually strictly enforced regardless of whether a subject believed the governing ideology. And subjects on which it was imposed often were indoctrinated in that ideology from child up and warned at the threat of punishment not to question or deviate from it. After these impositions and barriers fell and choice and education became available, ideologies had to contend for the sympathies and allegiances of individuals and societies. And they had to compete with rival ideologies, rational enlightenment, scientific promise, and personal independence. Not being able to compel subjects into commitment, they had to convince targets how beneficial following them would be and how much more beneficial than other ideologies or a rational approach they were. At these early stages of a liberal society, where ideologies were not or not fully implemented yet, they tried to convince by words, by representations and related arguments rather than actions or results. These solicitation efforts were further intensified by increasing competition, an opportunity resulting from an exponentially growing availability of information. The volume and variety of information and information delivery systems led, for a short period, to a golden age of information access and freedom of informed choice by consumers. But it also allowed ideologies commensurate freedom to pursue their agendas. Ideological lies escalated under the competitive pressure and permissiveness of providing convincing information. Still, their multiplicity and rivalry, as well as the survival or creation of independent information sources, contained them. Lies and truth could be separated by perusing wide ranges of sources and arguments. For purposes of this presentation, I will assume the existence of this ideal early state in the existence of a liberal society where the deleterious potentials of ideologies seem to be systemically under control. I use this ideal as a baseline to lay out possible subsequent developments in a general and hypothetical manner. I do this to make it easier to perceive how they might apply to a range of Western or co-opted societies at different stages and might be addressed at these stages. My descriptions are therefore not meant to reflect actual forward-looking or historical developments in any particular society, but only their potential. For the sake of clarity, my discussion also stylizes and categorizes main societal forces that may not be as clearly defined and distinct in actual circumstances, but may display gradual transitions and blends. Returning to these potential developments, the lively marketplace of information and related opinions may soon fall prey to the desires of ideologies to grow their market share and dominate other views. Open competition stands in their way. They may initially seek to raise the efficiency and effectiveness of their efforts by simplifying and streamlining their messaging through central organization. But they may also aspire to be more regularly present in targets' lives and to drown out the voices of contending ideologies or rational ascertainments and considerations critical of them. They may try to do this by usurping power over information sources. In consequence, the formation and installation of winning perceptions in the marketplace may soon depend not only on the content and relative aptitude of truth-tellers and liars. It may increasingly depend on the market footprint of ideologies. Ideologies may recognize that the most effective and efficient delivery of messaging will occur under the guise of informational institutions deemed independent and thus objective and trustworthy. They may therefore systematically infiltrate and appropriate journalism, education, publishing, entertainment, social networks, societal organizations, government, advisory boards, and associations. Beyond a cacophony of individual and associated amateur voices, sustained professional campaigns to sway the populace with lies may dominate public discourse. Ideological marketing requirements and potentials are proceeding hand in hand with the development of ideologies into political parties contending to rule a society. In the course of competition for this prize, weaker organizations are pushed to the side, and relatively few forces emerge with realistic chances of contention. To get to that point and improve their chances of winning and holding institutional power, ideologies modify their marketing to become more acceptable to a wider public. These deviations from their beliefs may be false advertising. Ideologies may say whatever they think convinces a sufficiently large portion to put them into and keep them in power. Their operatives may become masters of deception, geared to surreptitiously pursue their ideological goals. But pursuing these goals against the will of their voters endangers their grasp and grip on power. Advances toward their ideological goals create facts that at some point cannot be explained away. To maintain their chances and benefits of power over a society, they eventually must relent on their ideological fervor. One might think this is a good development because they then would be more beholden to stewardship over public concerns. But they are not likely to care about a public that made them give up their self-respect and dreams. And already having sacrificed their principles for power, they continue focusing on it as their main goal and occupation. By this self-serving orientation and betrayal of their ideological followers and the public, ideologies become corrupt organizations. Their focus on power and what this power might enable attract unscrupulous predators and freeloaders to leadership positions, who will exorcise any remaining spirit an ideology might still have had. Their infiltration of political parties and government seals both turning into criminal enterprises. As the political system matures and settles into few institutionalized ideologies competing for governance, these ideologies become able to consolidate and divide the marketplace of facts and ideas among one another. Initially, They would be set to use their market presence for competition with one another for the favor of voters. But they may soon realize they expend inordinate resources in fighting one another for usually incremental and regularly fluctuating power advantages. This may incentivize them to arrange coexistence in higher-level power-sharing cartels. These cartels may start in the institutionalized political structure of a society in which ideologies are compelled and expected to cooperate with one another to sustain the system and their presence in it. However, that cooperation may mutate to follow the classic economic model of a cartel to restrict competition, available information, and popular choice, so as to better take advantage of the populace. This might not be coincidental. Original ideologies would be averse to cooperating at such a level because they believe in a mission to impose their views. However, less idealistic interests may realize the great opportunities collusion among institutionalized ideologies in an organized society offers to take advantage of that society. Such interests may infiltrate ideological parties to advance their purposes. Or they may already run ideological parties with a preeminent focus on power. These interests already benefit greatly when the party they control is in power. But a cartel among parties regularly in the running for government would allow these and their controlling interests to conserve resources in fighting one another and assure participants uninterrupted, secure, and plannable benefits. Ideological parties and the governments they control may thus become converted fronts for racketeering. To hide and divert from self-serving policies that betray and counteract their ideological mission or public interest, ideological parties systematically lie to their members and the public. And so will governments they control. And if they entered into a cartel, they coordinate their lies with the other members. Not too obviously, of course. To gloss over their parties and the system's true state, governance and purpose, party leaders and a troupe of professional operators will put on a show that pretends they still care about ideological and public issues. They might superficially fight one another, while cooperating on a playbook for manipulating their membership and the public. As part of their pretenses, they might give their followers and the general public illusions of a functioning marketplace of information and ideas. They might provide some debate and perfunctory action on matters of ideological and public interest and semblances of member and public power over them in elections. But matters of true ideological or public interest are unlikely to be sufficiently addressed no matter who wins because controlling interests of such parties have different priorities. To sidetrack from these conditions, keep supporters committed, and the population in check despite failing to produce for them, ruling parties can employ a variety of techniques. They might sponsor and shape controversies that provoke, divide, and preoccupy their party or the populace. They might even prop up or establish extreme ideologies to produce more than verbal conflict. This infuses polarization and festering, incapacitating infighting into an ideology and society. They might also try to unite their followers or the populace in greed, blame, fear, and enmity against other systems, differentiations, or populations within or beyond their society. Such radicalizing practices prompt subjects to sacrifice ethics and self-respect as a worthwhile price to pay for winning against demonized opponents. This may be directly instrumental to forces instigating hostile dissociations. And besides distracting and weakening subjects, these practices turn them into accomplices. They get subjects to commit to lying as a legitimate weapon in the supposed existential fights ideologies engender. Together with the paralyzing consequences of systematic abuse, such disruptive practices incentivize followers and the public to fall in line behind the very forces that created and maintain this tumult, and their desperate situation. However, these forces will only manage conditions in ways that reflect positively on their power. Their interest in distracting and deflecting, in gaining support from pretending to take sides, and profiting from pretending to give a home and voice to polarized segments of a population they disenfranchised rules supreme. In this corrupting arc, the lying at the heart of ideologies completes its inherent logic. An ideology based on lies, and using lies as a vehicle for popularizing and implementing held viewpoints, ends up using lies for power, greed, and other debased purposes. The substantive distance of its changed agenda and employed theatrics to its origins hollows it out, leaving only rhetorical bluster and put-on nostalgia. The ideological shadow boxing among party and overarching cartel members on real and fabricated subjects may, besides serving as a ruse and distraction, be used to gain temporarily the upper hand for a participant in the division of spoils. But this is a reasonably friendly rivalry supported by the conviction that mutual accommodation results in a win for all participants that trumps potential fruits of contention. The system this creates cannot be stable because it is based on lies. Inasmuch as its artifices to abuse and control parties and the general population employ disturbance, insecurity, and exhaustion, they also carry a risk that this might motivate subjects to question reigning conditions and consider alternatives. Reality and its perception in truth are the principal banes of ideological machinations and their societal consequences. Reigning ideologies and their instruments of power will therefore attempt to suppress information contradicting their narratives and intent. And they will prevent questioning and investigation of their intrigues and conditions they create that might yield such information. Control of communication channels enables them to do that by their overweight presence in the public sphere, which allows them to push truth and quests for it to the fringes. And this presence also empowers them to shape public perception and opinion by disparaging critical questioning and opposing information and their sources as ludicrous, odious, and dangerous. Their influence empowers them to censor these activities and their sources, not only within their informational space but, due to their popular conditioning, also in real life. To further foreclose remaining flickers of independent thinking and meaningful exchange and debate of information, reigning ideologies might try to eliminate the concept of truth altogether. They might undertake this by introducing and pushing the idea that truth does not exist objectively but is created by individual minds and groups of individuals according to their subjective experiences and mental reactions to those experiences. According to this idea, we all are entitled to our own truth. This attitude legitimizes lying as voicing just another, alternate truth of equal value, thereby shutting down further efforts of distilling and discussing objective reality. Not all were lost if everybody were allowed to develop one's truth and to only cooperate where respective truths show adequate common basis. But that is, as already discussed, not how ideologies tend to operate. Fearing how societally unsustainable it might be to assert their idiosyncratic assertions as truth and objectifying their related views, they habitually push their programs beyond genuine subscribers. The most effective and efficient way of doing this is with lies. The question then arises how to prevent and counteract lying. We might bring back legal prohibition, and a social taboo resulting in punishment. Short of or in supplementation of such rules, it seems reasonable to focus on eliminating lies by revealing them in the light of truth. This is tricky territory since it poses the question what the truth of a matter is and how we know it to be the truth. Consensus does not seem a good measure since people's minds may be bent to agree on lies or unable to distinguish between reality and delusion. So there should be something else that indicates truth to us. In many cases authority is heralded as guarantor of truth. But history and present are replete with incidents where authority has been abused and invoked to spread and support lies, if only to establish and cement such authority. The sole reliable sourcing of truth seems to be proof and rational consideration of proof. What is proof? It is the showing of factuality of circumstances and their interactions. To recognize proof, we would have to rely on detection of these by our senses and processing by our mind. A resulting element of proof is understanding the causality of events and participating factors. Customary or previously experienced connections between circumstances may provide hypotheses of proof, but cannot replace it. Inferences of likelihood may not hold up to scrutiny we must bring to bear to assure theories comply with evidence. We may wonder, though, whether proof and rational consideration of proof by us is adequately feasible. Proving assertions and correctly drawing inferences can quickly overwhelm us because it is labor-intensive and so many assertions affect our existence. Not to speak of unasserted facts or conclusions that might affect us and whose existence and import we should investigate. We may not be able to access all relevant information ourselves. Even if we had access to all relevant information, we could not realistically expect to take cognizance and form an overview of the sheer volume of information, focus on what is important, or possess the expertise to understand and further process what we are looking at. Technical problems of access and organization seem solvable. And we may make some inroads calling on others to provide us with evidence and its considerations to supplement ours. This can help us create a larger direct base for assessing reality, and drawing our own conclusions. But it seems not nearly enough for many concerns. Our access to information may be restricted due to legitimate or illegitimate reasons. And information may be foreclosed due to the diversification and intensification of expertise. We may in many respects have to rely on experts for the provision and evaluation of information, as well as their relaying of such information and their evaluation to us in terms we can understand. And we may have to rely on experts to monitor information withheld from us to determine the legitimacy of such withholding. As inevitable as this third-party processing of information may be, it opens avenues of lying that are difficult for us to monitor. Those originating, citing, and purveying information may already qualify as experts. To confirm they are telling the truth and the whole truth, we should insist on proof being submitted by such experts to independent experts and generally to us so we can evaluate it and can have it evaluated by experts of our choice. We should also insist on discussion of such proof by all affected until it is broadly evaluated. Information should only be withheld from us to the extent experts we trust determine legitimate reasons for such secrecy and communicate these reasons for collective decision. But how do we deal with differences among reviewing experts? Relying on consensus or democracy among them seems an imperfect way of distilling the truth. Experts may be wrong and they may be motivated to lie. If anything, the stakes may be higher regarding expert communications because of their influencing potential. To lower and possibly eliminate that risk, we would have to scrutinize the record of experts on whom we rely in telling the truth and investigate their independence and interests in reviewing and conveying. This may be a difficult task since experts in a field have collected motivating experiences in it. They may even have had contact with those who are producing information in their field of expertise. And they may have related or other incentives prejudicing their treatment of sources or information. They may also have been co-opted by ideologies and institutions that would lie to us for their purposes. Even with experts interspersed, it would seem that proving up all the relevant, and even only the most relevant, bits of information flooding our way would be a never-ending struggle we might lose as soon as we or the flow of information stop. We might not want to get involved for fear the upkeep would eat us alive. We may prefer to sit on the sidelines and take consolation in the experience that truth carries one principal characteristic distinguishing it from lies: truth tends to come out and persist over long, while lies have the tendency of collapsing when interested parties fade away or lose their interests or power to maintain them, and opposing or uncommitted parties review their statements and conduct. But such revelations may not help those subjected to lies, including us, for some time if ever. And the longer these lies are permitted to develop without resistance, the more it can create havoc that is more difficult and costly or impossible to stop, reverse, and reboot. So it does not seem enough to wait and let general courses of events sort out truth from lies in reviews, revisions, and reversions of the past. To advance humanity and avoid unnecessary risk, suffering, and possibly irretrievable damage, we must intercede, ideally before lies settle in minds and fortify to where they become oblivious or impervious to correction. How would such interventions to work? We would have to draw the public's attention to lies and liars. We would have to investigate and publicize evidence of their falsehoods and motivating causes for lying. And we would have to contrast the truth and point to corrective action. In these efforts, we must show ourselves as examples of how we want fellow humans to behave. We want them to not just be open to evidence and considerations fed to them. We want to galvanize them to explore and state truth and identify and root out lies on their own accord. In this undertaking, we may find some limited support from opposing ideologies, and we may be able to rely on active defenders of objective truth. However, in many situations, these, even if combined, only form a minority of the relevant population. Most members of a society wish to go about their lives undisturbed by disputes. Additionally, ideologies have often succeeded in numbing the public into lethargy or intimidating it to not deviate from norms claimed acceptable by these ideologies. Its members may then only speak or act up when ideologies or their lies intolerably infringe on them. Until then, they may remain compliant and even retreat to not cause upheaval in their lives. This carries the risk that at the point when they would be willing to oppose an ideology or one of its lies, they and their setting would be intractably caught in ideological domination. The size and capacity of this group is easily underestimated due to its acquiescence and lack of representation. It may not vote at all for lack of meaningful choices, or only vote in attempts to have the evils of political parties contain one another. Some of it may succumb to ruling machinations and be swayed to side with one or the other party or get mired in distracting controversies. But at its core, the silent, stoic portion, the populace, forms if not a majority at least a substantial demographic of skeptical individuals opposed to socialized lies. Much is sometimes made of its passivity in the face of ideological impositions, abuse, and manipulation. Beyond endemic numbing and intimidation, some members may be obtuse, misinformed or uninformed, gullible, and easily misled. But these are much more the qualities of those allowing themselves to be converted to ideological attack dogs who will fight anybody onto whom their ideological masters sick them. Most acquiescing do not carry such failings. They are simply not interested in getting involved in schemes of lies surrounding them. Their common sense of reality keeps them grounded in building stability and thriving as well as they can apart from lying and scheming shenanigans. They are committed to truth, to reality, because this is where they must operate to edge out, maintain, and improve their existence, and the existence of whom and what they love. Their sensible, constructive attitudes and actions produce the real world from which the rest lives. And yet, in a crazy world systematically falsified beyond recognition, they are marginalized. Activating this group to speak its mind, refuse collaboration, and insist on alternative courses based on assessing truth and reality seems critical and indispensable. To succeed in this, we must not only lay out truth and convincing evidence of lies and their motivations. We must make a convincing case of the existential risks these lies cause for humans, societies, and humankind. Our efforts to raise public awareness of lies and their perpetrators will draw attention from ideological supporters and sympathizers. To believers in an ideology, truth contradicting it in premises or conclusions will appear as the lie, and they will denounce it accordingly. They may continue their convictions even in the face of compelling evidence. They may be unwilling to acknowledge its existence and try to weaken its impact. Rather than genuinely questioning the truthfulness of evidence with an open mind, they may try to disparage it with countervailing lies. This frequently includes personal attacks at purveyors of truth and those who accept it. Or they may try to deflect from or confuse undeniable truth by drawing attention to other pre-existing or contrived circumstances meant to balance that truth. This makes sense in the logic of an ideology, but also for those profiting from it regardless of whether they believe its content. Truth is ideological kryptonite. Ideological agents must therefore suppress it to continue the ideology's existence as the basis of the benefits they draw from partaking in its organization. Being revealed as a liar threatens these benefits, and even more so admitting having been a liar. They spell disastrous personal uprooting for ideological activists' inner and outer life. But victims of lies may also refuse to acknowledge the existence, content, or import of truth. Though not materially invested in ideological lies, they may suffer from their revelation or admission if they have accommodated ideologies and incorporated them into their life. Even if victims do not face existential issues if their factual and derivative convictions are revealed as lies, they may resist such exposure for embarrassment and fear of being exposed as fools for having believed and repeated lies. Negative consequences of being proven wrong for their self-respect and respect from their environment may form steep hurdles some people cannot take. They may prefer to continue questionable, sometimes untenable protestations that their views remain correct even while suffering internal and social consequences of holding on. They may feel too committed to reverse course. There may be a continuum and overlap among genuine believers, operatives, and victims of an ideology. And they may share substantial motivations in sustaining and defending an ideologically governed society. They may identify with such a system based on deep-set and possibly unconscious tribal and hierarchic drives and crystallization points that compromise and neutralize consideration and judgment. Or they may value the benefits of collaboration and of working within the system to their benefit higher than changing the system to comport with reality and ensuing considerations or reordering it. I have written about these systemic incentives of a mendacious system in my article The Scourge of Mendacity, which might be considered a companion piece and can be read in the blog section of the philosophyofhappiness.com website. Due to the broad sharing of motivations across the spectrum of the discussed three groups who in a wider sense have become proponents of an ideological system, resistance toward views reversing that system includes any or all three of them. Here again, changing minds may likely require an unbearable situation, and probably much more so and much more clearly shown to be the fault of reigning ideologies, than to what is necessary to activate silent, unattached segments. The task of orienting ideological minds to the truth is usually much harder since concepts of reality have to be changed and not just encouraged to find release. The common rarity of this happening does not bode well for resolving an ideology directly as a promising front in the battle for truth. Ideological mindsets may be too ingrained to convert to other views beyond an opportunistic lip service without conviction. They may much rather seek refuge in the doctrinal familiarity of opposing ideologies than embracing independent thinking. This independence requires training to which ideologically primed minds may not have been exposed and which they might have problems learning since it involves irreconcilably opposed techniques and sensitivities. We may then rightly doubt our goals of autonomous pursuit of truth will take much hold in ideologically schooled minds. We may hope for more success with shallow virtue signalers who use ideologies or ideological causes for showing themselves in a socially attractive light. They will superficially indicate solidarity with popular stances by flashing identifying insignia, and perfunctorily aping statements of support. They may pose for several fashionable causes at a time, or consecutively, only to drop these when they grow unpopular, stale, or become superseded by new in-crowd favorites for signaling being part of that in-crowd. The urge to be part of a popular crowd shows deep insecurity and lack of critical thinking. Often, these hangers-on are poorly informed about the ideologies and matters they claim to support, or they lack the intellectual prowess to substantively engage. But no matter how smart or much they are aware of a cause, they do care about it nearly as much as how appearing to support that cause reflects on them. This makes their enthusiastic endorsements lies. And their selfish motivations in hiding behind fake care for others make them as cynical in their lies as ideologists who abuse their professed ideology for personal profit. The distinction may only be that virtue signalers find themselves at the other end of the power spectrum. But the depravity of their lies is still significant since their signaling for attention can make support for causes pushed by ideologies seem much stronger than it is. Ideologies are aware how easily narcissistic, shallow, insecure twits can be influenced by them and how useful they can be to help form and align public opinion. Their culture and education policies are therefore aimed at generating and advancing requisite personal qualities. They bank on such qualities and resulting uncritical support over more capable followers for their ideologies because more astute intellects might see through their lies and corruption rather quickly. Agents they recruit for their organizations may start as ideological followers but will be only of use and only move up the ideological hierarchy if they can be corrupted to embrace an ideology's machinations. The result is a concentration of unprincipled cynicism at the low and high end of ideological associations, with believers and sympathizers of their substantive lies forming a more sincere middle. The malleability of virtue signalers might let them appear as good potential candidates for turning against ideologies and their lies. Arguably, relatively little effort should be required if sufficient incentives of social acknowledgement beckon on the other's side. But truth may heavily struggle against ideological tides, and its demonization by ideologies that have co-opted virtue signalers may make it appear unpopular long after it has gained traction. And it seems rather unlikely virtue signalers would reverse themselves and join a truthful counterpoint because this would reveal them as the cowardly weather vanes they are. They might at best drop their signaling, fall silent to avoid embarrassment, and resurface with some other shtick later. For better effect and efficiency, and possibly as our only hope, we may have to focus our informational liberation efforts on those not bound by reigning ideologies who will not need much more convincing regarding their deleterious effects. For those inextricably delusional and those who have made up their minds to reject reality and not allow truthful information or its rational consideration, solutions will have to be found that neutralize their threats. The best a society may be able to accomplish is allow them a zone of privacy where they can conduct themselves according to their beliefs as long as they do not violate legitimate interests of others. How would we establish this zone of privacy and these legitimate interests? One widely accepted guiding principle would be the right of every competent individual to freedom, to be left alone, to not be subjected involuntarily to the claims or acts of anybody else. Individuals who are not competent require special protections of their concerns, possibly by preempting or suspending some of their rights while putting others in charge of them. Among competent individuals, we might imagine an equal-sized sphere of rights surrounding each person. We might also imagine particularities that warrant unequal attribution of some rights to enable relatively more important rights for general harmony among individuals. More generally, we might imagine that where personal spheres intercede, just or consensual arrangements will have to be found. And we might believe that laws should be equally applicable and that justice requires the truth of matters to be impartially established and wrongs to be interdicted and corrected. Most humans will acknowledge such common-sense ideas as foundations of a legal order. The problem with ideologies is that they attempt to define or invent rights from their underlying lies to convey legitimacy to these lies and to thereby implement their ideology. They may also invent, redefine, and abolish rights to cause distracting controversy or to weaken opponents. In protection and promotion of their lies by rights, they insist that everybody else in a society respect these rights. Respecting such claimed rights would mean respecting underlying lies and subjection of a society to such lies. Ideologies foresee the inherent problems with this course. They are therefore ready to impose such imaginary rights through their governmental and societal enforcement mechanisms, often regardless of and contrary to public opinion. Once such bogus rights are officially established, telling and acting according to the truth and exposing, criticizing, or even questioning or discussing their underlying lies becomes a legal offense. This interdiction of speech serves as a warning phenomenon that should make us think twice before we embark on punishing people for what we perceive to be lying. We should keep in mind that liars and their ideologies may turn the tables against those standing for truth. Unless a lie is proven, and that it has caused damage or there is imminent risk of it causing damage, interdiction and punishment are problematic because of their abuse potential. Otherwise, the systematic evidential correcting of misrepresentations without attribution and pinning people down in blame seem much better modes of fighting lies and affirming reality. Truth does not need to be defended by tactics ideologies would apply. It just needs to be set free to enable people receptive to it to absorb it and use it to set themselves free. But how do we tell the weaponization of legal order in the service of ideologies from legitimate protection of rights? Apart from egregious incidents, this may seem to quickly become a difficult question to answer. We won't be able to answer it until we clarify what qualifies legitimate rights. To possess legitimacy, rights would have to be founded on circumstances we want to be protected and accommodated. Our principal concern is securing the existence and thriving of us and others. Other circumstances we want to secure flow from this principal concern as they are needed for securing our existence and thriving. Their concerns are represented by our needs. Common sense experience helps us define these and corresponding rights that protect or accommodate their pursuit and fulfillment. These needs form the core of our spheres of interests and related rights. Within these spheres, no one else has a legitimate interest of prescribing how one should act or interact, and competent individuals have the right to voluntarily give up rights the legal order preserves. However, to create a system in which fundamental rights and spheres can be protected and accommodated, we must arrive at mutual recognition of the underlying needs as common humans' needs. Our coexistence with others and their needs and the resulting incentive to coordinate the pursuit and fulfillment of needs introduces rights enabling, but also obligations limiting, our spheres. It introduces curbs on our rights and makes us responsible for securing basic rights of others. To enable coexistence, coherence, and cooperation in a society, the basic rights defining individual spheres have to be balanced. Their treatment must impart on members a sense of mutual justice, meaning that their concerns are as important as everybody else's. This generally means that every human has to be accorded the same rights. Humans do not possess identical abilities and preferences to exercise these rights and fill them with life. And society cannot eradicate these differences in ability and must respect personal preferences as part of members' personal spheres. Still, special protections and accommodations are societally acknowledged, to address special conditions and resulting special needs. But under the principle of mutuality and justice, special rights are only legitimately granted to secure the rights of debilitated or disadvantaged individuals in satisfying common human needs by assisting in their pursuit and fulfillment. Such special rights are then not deviations, but affirmations of the fundamental principles of a legal order founded on commonality, mutuality, and balance. All other laws are mere detailing how to flesh out these fundamental principles. While this all sounds simple enough, the creation, maintenance, and application of such a legal order offer unending opportunities for abuse or skirting. To protect a legal order and its beneficiaries, laws must be connected and justified by their roots in common human needs and matching common human rights, even as humanity develops. All laws must ultimately comport with and advance the reality of these needs and their overarching prime directive of securing human existence and thriving to the best of their ability. This means that rights, legal obligations, and any legal arguments and assessments must comply with this reality. They cannot be based on speculation, fiction, or subjective perception and conclusions. Upholding common human reality, and its constructive requirements in justice require ongoing oversight and review. Court systems are charged to undertake this in cases brought before them. But the members of a legal order must supervise, and if need be correct, all affairs of government. And, to be able to undertake this task competently, they must understand and assess all societal concerns. They must also determine how they should conduct themselves and what principles they should hold in areas not regulated by laws, but left to individual or group discretion. All these responsibilities make a right to continually question, assess evidence, and discuss any subject without repercussion an indispensable foundation of a healthy society.